Oh, good morning. Good afternoon, whatever time of day it is. Some of you, it's the middle of the night. Some of you, it's like me, still dark out, but some of you, it's in the evening. So bear with me if I'm not going to speak as long as I planned on doing, because I actually am recovering from COVID. So if I conk out, you will see in the top there, Leslie Desjardins, who is one of my board members, who's going to pick up for me if I just need to back out. So, all things being equal, the subject of today's seminar, which we're planning on about 90 minutes of talk and then 30 minutes for you to be able to post questions or request a microphone to be able to ask you a question in person. As usual, we do ask for courtesy. There are a lot of people on the call today, so it may take a while to get to you. If we don't, if your question is in the chat window, we will certainly get to it after the event. The event is being recorded. If you wish afterwards, feel free to share the recording. We will be posting it to a webpage with the resources that are talked about today, some of the videos that we may be watching. And then at that point, feel free to comment and share. And if there are extra bits of this that you would like to see emphasized in a future event, please let us know. Oh, thank you. I'm having happy things here, and thank you for the kind thoughts. My only regret is that some person whose parentage I am questioning did not get vaccinated and presented me with a breakthrough accident, but we won't get into that because that's libel and slander. And anyway, purpose of the day's event is to talk about the bane of on-site water designers, installers, regulators. It's how do you ensure that where you're going to put this, it's going to actually work? There are many tools in the toolbox. There are obviously soil scientists, and I know we have a couple on the call today, who will claim that the Perc test absolutely has no place in designing. For some regulators, it is basically the only tool they have. They will admit that it's not the best, takes too long, kind of inaccurate, and how far its results translate to the rest of the available site is debatable, but as I said, it is what it is. So at this point, enter some alternatives and the opportunity for looking at the way one of our board members, Richard Flynn, who's in the Republic of Ireland and has worked with the Irish on-site wastewater, and Lawrence Gill and Joanne, who I think dropped off the video there. But anyway, McMahon, and they have been working on regulation for the Irish on-site industry. And so with that, I am going to hand over to Richard to take it away.
Thank you, Dendra. I'm just going to try and share my screen here. Okay, I'm not sure, does everyone see my screen?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. What I think is a very interesting subject. Not everyone would agree with me, but it's what I do. It's my day-to-day business. And I'm just delighted that we have the opportunity to discuss it today. I'm thrilled that we have such experts online with us. Just a brief introduction. I'm in independent private practice in Ireland. All my contact details are there. I'm sure Ginger will share them afterwards. If anyone wants to contact me afterwards, feel free to. I'm a chartered engineer, but I'm also a certified site assessor. And in 2004, I completed my FOSS-FETEC site suitability assessment training, which was a combination of classroom training and field work. And this famous cert allows me to carry out site assessments. I suppose back in 2004, it was another string to my bow, but over the course of 17 years, it's become my core work, which consists basically of site suitability assessment, designing wastewater treatment systems, and certifying installation of systems. Just give you a bit of background on Irish regulations and legislation. First standard we got was the National Standards Authority of Ireland, Standard Recommendation 6 of 1975. I'm sure at the time it was a fantastic document, and I suppose it was a start of something better. This was replaced in 1991 with the SR6 of 1991. Again, it's just updated the standards a bit more. In 2000, we had the EPA manual, which really kicked off the whole EPA code of practice and influenced where our industry was going. It took 9 years after the manual to actually get to the code of practice. The code was transposed into Irish law, and its part of legislation was replaced the SR6 of 1991 and formed part of the building regulations. In 2016, we started a review of the code. The review, I suppose, was based upon research carried out by Lawrence Lee's team at Trinity College and the EPS Drive 161 report, which basically introduced lower permeability size and gave the opportunity for size with percolation values up to 120 to be considered for suitable treatment of wastewater. I had hoped when we started this review that we would incorporate constant head testing for lower permeability size, but unfortunately it didn't happen. I suppose the common theme between all this legislation from 1975 to date is a combination of tri-hole assessment plus percolation test. Again, I know standards are different in other countries and we've heard internationally. Some people just have tri-hole assessment, some people just have percolation tests. That is the common theme here, and it's the theme we're working to. Just have a quick look at this is the tri-hole analysis sheet in our site suitability assessment form. It details the depth of our tri-hole, depth from ground surface to bedrock if bedrock is present, depth of water ingress, what type of rock is there, when excavated and when examined. The interesting thing at the bottom here is following our analysis of the soil profiles, we attempt to put a likely subsurface percolation value and a likely surface percolation value. Just look at it in more detail. Our tri-hole assessment is carried out based on British Standard 593 of 1999, where we look at the soil profile, we look at texture and classification, plasticity and dilatancy, soil structure itself, density, compactness. We look at color, signs of mottling in the soils, preferential flow paths. Do we have any fractured bedrock in place? And this is our percolation test. It's based on 3 test holes where we get an average value at the end of it. It involves pre-soaking. We pre-soak twice between 4 and 24 hours before the actual test. And proceed with the test in, and our result is the number of minutes per 25 millimeters drop, basically. So if we have a percolation value of 50 minutes for 25 mil, it means I'm on site for 12 hours at least doing my percolation test. And I did hope that if we had constant head testing, it would reduce that substantially. And we will hear from Lawrence and Joanne shortly and their research, and hopefully that will move things forward in Ireland. So I was lucky to be on site earlier this year with Lawrence, doing some concentrate tests, and it pushed me to looking at acquiring my own concentrate test kit. So I've done some research, got on the email to my friend in Hawaii, Dendra, and progressed from there to Prince Edward Island in Canada, where I met another fantastic lady, Kelly Galloway. Kelly and I had some detailed discussions and knowledge sharing. And with good logistics, we ended up getting an ETC pass permeometer over to 6 Mile Bridge in the island of Ireland. I've been using the permeometer for the last couple of months. I must stress, all of my site assessments are carried out strictly in accordance with the EPA Code of Practice and all the methods and standards therein. My use of the pass permeometer is strictly for my own personal research and just to broaden my knowledge and understanding of alternative methods and really the scientific methods for assessing soils. That's the permeometer test kit, which we'll hear a lot more from Kelly shortly. And the next few slides are just me using it on site. That's the auger for digging the test soil. That's the test soil. You can see it's pretty consistent. We have a little wire brush for exposing the pores. And this is the permeometer in action. I'm really impressed with how easy it is to use the permeometer. Very impressed with the consistency of results, but I'm even more impressed with the time it's taking to actually complete the test. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoy the rest of the discussion and conversations, and really looking forward to it. I'll hand over back to you, Dendra, and over to Kelly, I think.
Yeah, thanks,
Thank you.
Richard. Yeah, stop sharing your screen if you would. And take it away, Kelly.
Okay, let me just get my screen shared here. Okay. So I have just a presentation, a slide, a presentation I've given at some previous conferences, NAURA, and I think I gave it at SepticCon in Seattle back in 2020, just before COVID hit, and at some conferences in Canada as well. It's always very interesting, the reactions and the comments that I get when I'm giving this presentation. One of the first things that I guess I want to clarify and say right at the outset, because often the reaction I get from practitioners, regulators, soil scientists, and others is that I'm advocating a return to or abandoning the test pit, doing test pits and doing a proper site evaluation or soil evaluation in favor of permeability testing. And so I want to be really clear that that's not at all what I'm advocating. I definitely feel that test pits, doing a proper test pit evaluation is essential for a proper site assessment and for the proper sizing of an on-site sewage system. But I have found in my experience over 20 some years in using the permeometer and in teaching others how to use it, that it's complementary to a test pit evaluation. And in many cases, the results from the permeability testing have led me to be more conservative with soil loading rates or the sizing of an on-site sewage system. So just want to make that clear that that's the perspective that I'm coming from. And I'm not advocating a return to the percolation test by itself or even permeability testing by itself. So just going to present mode here. Hopefully you can still see my full screen. Dendra, you can nod, you can be my, yeah, Richard's giving me the thumbs up. Okay. So just very quickly then, background that, you know, this is all common sense to many people, I'm sure, on the call here today. But the percolation test has been around for decades, and it's been used as an indicator in the development of on-site sewage systems for determining appropriate soil loading rates, and it's also used for sizing stormwater infiltration systems and other types of systems that involve water flowing into the soil, and where there's a need to understand how the soil accepts that flow of water. So perc time, or in some jurisdictions it's called T time, is defined as the time period required for water, the water level in an open pit or borehole in unsaturated soil to fall a specific distance. And it can be expressed, it's usually expressed in either minutes per centimeter or minutes per inch or minutes per 25 millimeters or something like that. The problem with the perc test is that it can, the results that you get can change significantly depending on test conditions. And the perc test, or the perc rate, is not a true soil property. It can vary with changes in background soil moisture, soil capillary properties, and it can even be manipulated to a certain degree to almost produce a desired outcome by adjusting the diameter of the well hole, water depth, etc. So because it's not a true soil property, when reporting perc time, you really need to kind of qualify the parameters that were used in doing the tests, such as the water depth, the hole radius, and the soil type. So as I mentioned, I'm not at all advocating that we should not do test pits. I'm definitely an advocate and a fan and all of that for the so-called soil morphology approach, doing test pits. And the challenge with that, I mean, I come from a civil engineering background, so I'm not a soil scientist. I'm not steeped in soil science, and oftentimes when we're trying to teach practitioners with varying levels of education from the on-site industry, or even people with significant post-secondary education in something other than soil science, you know, it's challenging to convey the information and the skills that soil scientists get in their years of training to be able to properly discern, you know, the subtleties of soil texture and especially structure and some of the other soil characteristics that we're usually recording in it when we do a test pit evaluation and logging the soil profile. So, but nevertheless, there seems to be a growing support throughout the on-site industry that test pits or the soil morphology approach is a better approach than just digging a hole in the ground and pouring water into it and seeing how fast it seeps into the ground. Jerry Tyler has published tables. I guess it was back in 2001. He published a paper where he proposed various wastewater loading rates or soil loading rates based on various soil and effluent characteristics. And the so-called Tyler tables are replacing the perc time based sizing in many codes and guidelines throughout North America. So why do we need, is there a need for accurate infiltration testing? I would say yes, that it's very helpful to complement the test pit, especially when the soil texture is not necessarily all that clear. For example, when you get into sandier soils, sands, loamy sands, sandy loams, where the sand subclasses are are not able to be easily determined just by hand texturing, which is what most practitioners in the field are going to be doing unless they're taking samples and sending them to a lab for sieve testing. We also find that sometimes it's hard to, just from a test pit evaluation, it's not always easy to tell the impact of subtle changes or differences in soil structure or density on the permeability, or on ultimately on what's an appropriate long-term application rate or soil loading rate for an on-site sewage system. So this is where having another tool or another piece of information to kind of use to kind of to consider along with the test pit results is helpful. So for example, in my area here where I live and work in Prince Edward Island in Eastern Canada, sandy loam soil is the dominant soil type across the province. But it's a glacial till. We have a glacial till geology, so that the soil tends to be quite dense. Once you get down deeper than 2 feet, it starts to get very compact. But the degree of density or compactness or compaction and the range in sand particle sizes can vary quite a bit across the island. And I've had discussions with my local regulators here where they've said, one of the regulators called me up one day and they were investigating a failed system, and they were looking at the test pit data, and based on the test pit data, it looked like it should have been very suitable soil. It was a sandy loam. And I said, well, did anybody collect any samples to see, what, is it a fine sandy loam, a medium sandy loam, a coarse sandy loam? Because of course those different sand grains can really affect the clogging, the potential for, biomat to form and the clogging potential of the soil. And long story short, that particular system, it turned out the regulator went back and got some samples and had them tested. And it turned out that there was a fairly significant proportion of fine and very fine sand in this sandy loam. Whereas a few miles down the road, you could have a sandy loam that has, it's more the medium sand or even coarse sand. And what we find is when we're doing permeability tests in those sandy loams with a lot of the finer sand, not surprisingly, I think, we're getting much lower permeability results. So it's kind of a check on that visual and textural analysis that the practitioners are doing when they do the test pit. So, and this is I mentioned the Tyler tables and Jerry Tyler's work. I was involved with the Canadian Standards Association on a technical committee we developed a code for decentralized wastewater systems for a national code for Canada. And as part of the committee work, we incorporated, kind of built some hydraulic loading rate tables based on the work of Jerry Tyler. And but it's quite apparent, from the way this is broken down and from Jerry Tyler's experience and many of us that were involved in this committee, that we were seeing that it was appropriate to break this down into different, not just loamy sand or sand, but you do have to consider those sand subclasses and the proportion of fine or very fine sand, because it is going to affect it's going to have a difference on what is an appropriate loading rate. So that's how we've sort of ended up in Eastern Canada, and several other provinces are using more of a dual approach now to site evaluation, where in addition to doing the test pit evaluation, they're also requiring in situ permeability tests with a constant head permeameter. Some are still allowing practitioners to do percolation tests, but there is sort of a movement to convert over to permeability testing. And we found that with the permeability testing, we found that practitioners of varying skill levels can successfully be taught how to do the tests. So I'm an advocate of field saturated hydraulic conductivity, or KFS, as an alternative to perc time. And the most important thing to note about KFS, or about field saturated hydraulic conductivity, as determined through a permeability test, is that it's a true soil property, unlike percolation testing. So it stands on its own. You don't need to qualify it and say, well, when I calculated KFS in this soil on this day, I used a hole this size and this diameter, and I had this much water in the hole. The formulas that are used to calculate KFS take care of all of that, and the number that comes out the end, that is just a number that stands on its own. So in order to determine KFS in Canada, and I think starting to catch on more in the US, but a lot of work has been done over the years by a couple of researchers formerly from the University of Guelph in Ontario, Dave Elric and Dan Reynolds, and they published widely on a method that they started doing research on, or developed back in the early 80s, maybe even a little bit before that, called the constant head well permeameter method. And so the method is based on the observation that when a constant head of water is ponded in a borehole or a well in unsaturated soil, you get a bulb of field saturated soil that gradually establishes around the base of the well. And as that bulb establishes, the flow of water out of the well and into the soil approaches a constant rate after a period of time, which is a so-called steady state rate of flow. So it's kind of a depiction of that, what it looks like. Your well hole, you have a constant water level ponded in the hole during the test. And as the test proceeds, this field saturated bulb develops around the base of the well hole. And when you reach steady state conditions, the size of that saturated bulb doesn't increase. It sort of becomes stable. But as the water continues to move out into the soil, there's a wetting front that will continue to move beyond the field saturated bulb. But the field saturated bulb itself does not continue to grow in size. And that's just critical to the whole theory behind how you calculate KFS from this method. So when doing a test, it has to be done when the soil's at field capacity or drier. Saturated soil has no capillarity, and you won't get a proper result if you try to do a test in saturated soil. So the constant head well permeameter method can be used with any number of constant head permeameters available on the market today. And one of the important aspects or features of it is that it constituted an improvement over the previous kind of state-of-the-art method published in the literature known as the Glover analysis. Now, the problem with the Glover analysis, as published or reported by Elric and Reynolds, is that it only accounts for one component of flow out of the borehole, whereas the constant head well permeameter analysis accounts for all three components of flow: the hydraulic push from the head of water, the gravitational pull of water through the base of the well, and capillary suction into the surrounding soil. So Reynolds and Elric reported that under some conditions, because of this, because of the fact that the Glover analysis only accounts for this one component of flow, under certain conditions, such as a small ponded head in relatively dry, fine soil, the Glover analysis can actually overestimate KFS by an order of magnitude or more. So you could be getting, if you're using the Glover analysis to calculate KFS from your permeameter test, your permeameter test data, you could be, you know, in terms of on-site sewage system design, you could be less conservative or not conservative enough if you're coming up with KFS values that are too high or showing that the soil has a higher K value than it really does. So again, the constant head well permeameter method accounts for all three components of flow. And another essential part to doing a proper test is that the test be allowed to run long enough to reach steady state flow. So steady state flow is generally determined once you get 3 to 5 rates of fall on the reservoir or the permeameter that are the same. So unlike requirements for Perc testing in some jurisdictions, there's no need for pre-soaking the hole. Apart from now cases if you're dealing with soils that are, shrink swell clays, that there may be some justification for kind of pre-soaking to allow that clay time to expand. But for soils that are generally, considered to be faster, moderately permeable soils conducive to on-site sewage systems, in many cases, it only takes as little as 30 minutes to an hour to run a test for those types of soils. If you're in a clay soil, very fine grained soil, then it will take several hours to reach steady state usually. But for a lot of the better soils, you can complete a test usually in less than an hour. So this is kind of typically what you would see during a test, where the rate of fall would tend to level out over time. And once you get three or four readings in a row that are the rate of fall is the same, then you know that you've run the test long enough and you can stop it at that point. Just a little graphic here, just sort of to show what's happening underground, where with different soil textures, if you're doing a test in a sand, the volume of soil that you're sort of testing is the shape of that field saturated bulb is going to be a little bit different than if you're in a finer grained soil like a loam. With a sand, the field saturated bulb tends to be kind of deeper down in the soil. And if you're testing in a clay, that field saturated bulb can actually be quite thin. So it's just something to bear in mind when you're testing a particular soil horizon, that you're only really testing an area very close to the well hole. So to determine KFS, there's just a few things that are needed. There's different approaches with the single head or the constant head well permeameter method. There's the single head method and the dual head method. For on-site sewage applications and for ease of use by practitioners, generally the single head method is what's taught or what's recommended. But to use this method, the practitioner has to be capable of identifying the soil that they're testing out of one of, say, 4 broad categories. So they have to be able to determine which soil capillary category the soil falls into, so that they'll use the appropriate table or calculation to determine KFS. So they just have to really be able to slot it into one of these categories. And most practitioners, in my experience, after some basic training, they're able to do this. This category here, the 0.12, the moderate capillary category, covers most structured soils, medium sands. It's sort of if you're not really sure, if you're kind of on the fence, this is probably the best one to pick. And the work of Reynolds and Elric has shown that if somebody is off by a category, it's not highly significant in terms of the impact on KFS. The error that's introduced is not is not that significant. So even if they are off by a category, and most practitioners will usually, after some basic training, will pick an appropriate category, or at most be off by one way or the other. So that's the lovely looking formula that's the basics of the constant head well parameter method. But as you'll see here, we've developed an alternative, some quick reference tables, so that practitioners who don't have, advanced post-secondary education and math skills, they don't need to crunch these numbers or program them into a spreadsheet. So as I think I mentioned, the constant head well parameter method is a mathematical, approach or model that was published by Elric and Reynolds, and the subject or the outcome of result of their research over a couple of decades ongoing. But it can be used with many different types of permeameters, constant head permeameters. So, in addition to the permeameter that we have put together, there's several that I'm sure many of you are familiar with in the US, the Amusa meter, the Johnson meter, the Aardvark permeameter, the Guelph permeameter, which was named after the University of Guelph, where Reynolds and Elric were the university where they did all the research. But any one of those permeameters can be used with the constant head well parameter method. And I know in some parts of the US where they are using constant head permeameters, they're still using the Glover method to do the calculations. And I'm of the opinion that they should really be looking at the work of Elric and Reynolds and with transitioning to the more scientifically accurate constant head well parameter method, because it has been I think it's generally considered, based on all the peer-reviewed publications and so on, that it was an improvement over the Glover method. So Richard had a shot of our permeameter kit, but that's just another one again. So it is a very simple device. It's not like something like the Guelph permeameter and the Aardvark, at least. I'm not sure about the Johnson meter. They have a few more features and flexibility in terms of the depth that you can go with the device. But we developed this particular device to suit the needs of the on-site industry for what we felt were the majority of cases where the soil profile or the depth of tests that's required is usually like within 4 feet of the ground surface. If you need to go deeper than that, you can. And if there's a test pit, if there's a backhoe on site anyway, or an excavator, because you're doing test pits, which I hope you are, because as I said, I'm an advocate of doing both, then you can use the machine to dig down and dig a safe hole that a practitioner could enter and then auger down to their desired test depth to do testing at greater depths. So instead of crunching numbers through that yucky formula that I showed you earlier, we've basically prepared a set of tables, one for each of those soil types. And so to use the tables, all the practitioner needs to do to get their KFS value is make sure they run the test long enough till they reach steady state flow. So they need their rate of fall, which they'll calculate in centimeters per minute. And they need to decide what soil type, which soil category they're in. So all they have to do is go into the table, the appropriate table. If their rate of fall at steady state, when it reached steady state conditions, was 1 centimeter per minute, they go into the table and go across, and their KFS is 5.3 by 10 to the minus 6 meters per second. And these quick reference tables, we've developed them, and I'm just in the process of generating some new ones where the units will be in millimeters per day. We've also done them in inches per hour, if they can be generated in whatever whatever units is preferred by that particular jurisdiction. But generally, either meters per second or millimeters per day are the common units that KFS, that hydraulic conductivity, is expressed in. And I'm going to, I'm certainly moving towards the millimeters per day, for the simple reason that the meters per second in scientific notation is another deterrent for practitioners who don't have post-secondary education. They don't understand scientific notation. It just confuses people. So millimeters per day is a nicer unit that's going to result in a whole number more greater than 1. So that's at least 2 provinces in Western Canada. Those are the units that they use for KFS, is millimeters per day. So again, the tables, as I mentioned, so each of these tables relates to the soil category, the different capillary categories. So there's the 0.36 category, which includes coarse and gravelly sands. It may also include some highly structured soils with large cracks or macropores. And these definitions come straight out of the research and the publications by Elric and Reynolds on the constant head method. This is all their part of their research. This is the 0.2 tables, which again says the first choice for most soils if you're on the fence which way to go. So it covers most structured soils from clays through loams, and also includes unstructured, medium, and fine sands. Then the 0.04 is where you're getting into much finer textured soils, the soils that are fine textured and massive, or unstructured clay and silty soils, and also very fine structureless sandy materials. So these tables have been developed. The caveat with using these tables is that they're developed based on using the particular auger, and which will produce a particular hole size, the auger that comes with our kit, and the height of water, the ponded height of water that the permeameter produces. So if somebody has an Aardvark permeameter or a Johnson meter or a Musa meter, you couldn't use these tables. You'd have to develop your own tables, and otherwise you're not going to get the correct results. So they're specific to our particular kit. So some factors that can affect the accuracy of tests. The biggest one would be not waiting until steady state has been reached. So you need to wait till you get at least 3 rates of fall that are similar. In finer grained soils with a reasonable amount of clay and silt, if there's smearing, if you get smearing or compaction during augering, and that smear layer isn't sort of scraped off, which can be challenging with some soils. There's different tools that have been developed in addition to the brush, the brush approach. There's other ones that Reynolds and Elric have reported on in their literature, little scraping tools and different things. The soil can get compacted if you're not careful during augering. So we teach people, tell them to use the 2-finger 2-turn rule. Basically take a light touch with the auger, don't be coming down on it with all your weight, and empty the auger after a couple of turns so that you're not piling lots of soil in there. And if you're in some cases, if you're in very unstable soils, the well could collapse during measurement. And if that's the case, you'd need to use some kind of a well screen or some fine gravel around the lower reservoir in order to prevent that from happening. Another factor that could affect the accuracy would be a poor choice of this capillary category that they have to choose from. As I said, the one of 4 categories. But as I already mentioned, according to the work of Reynolds and Elric, the K value is not overly sensitive to a poor selection of that category. And also the error from this can be minimized by using a larger ponded height, so a larger constant head in the well, and a larger well radius. If, again, related to augering, if someone's not careful and they're kind of going wild with the auger and they end up augering a hole that's much larger than what is assumed either in the calculations, or if they're using our quick reference tables, they'll get that'll produce erroneous results. So if they have to be careful, you have to be careful to make sure that the hole is uniform and not you're not kind of rounding out the hole as you auger, so that you end up with a bigger hole than what you're actually using in the calculations. So for jurisdictions that want to incorporate some type of infiltration test, but they're having difficulty letting go of the percolation test, or maybe they're thinking they might transition, but they don't want to just throw it out completely. A new relationship was developed a few years ago between Perc Time and KFS, and Dr. Dan Reynolds of Reynolds and Elric, he was the lead author on the paper, on the research, and also Daniel Radcliffe from UGA, and I also had some input on the paper as well. So in the course of investigating or trying to come up with a new relationship, we looked into existing correlation tables, if you will, between Perc Time and KFS that we found from various states and provinces, including Virginia, Connecticut, Georgia, Ontario here in Canada. And this is just a graph from the paper, but essentially what Dr. Reynolds found when he analyzed this was that none of the relationships, or the correlations, if you will, that were published in various codes were scientifically correct or accurate. They all had issues. So a new method, Dr. Reynolds developed a new method to calculate Perc Time from the KFS test. And like the constant head well, it was based on the constant head well permeameter method that's been around for 20 plus years. So this approach, this model allows for all three components of flow out of the well hole. And just as an example, if a practitioner is wanting to use a constant head permeameter for the various benefits that it offers, but they need to report a Perc Time for regulatory reasons, whatever, to comply with their local codes, they can do that by once they calculate the KFS value, they can do a test as normal, a permeability test with the permeameter, calculate their K value, and then after they determine the K value, they can calculate the Perc Time, or an equivalent Perc Time, with a relatively simple calculation. This M, constant M, is selected from the table, and M divided by the K value gives you the equivalent Perc Time. So we're also in the process of developing some quick reference tables that would save this step. So a practitioner would potentially have the K value in the table, and right next to it a column with the equivalent Perc Time. And that is the presentation I had. I also had a 2-minute video here that Dendra, do I still have enough time to show that?
Yes, you do.
Okay. If I drag my window over here, can you see that? Or do I need to reshare?
No, yes, fine.
You can see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. This is just a short video that just shows just the steps, what it looks like when somebody's doing a test in the field with a ETC PASC permeameter. Okay, the rest is just showing cleaning it off, so I don't need to show you that. So one comment I was just going to make, when it comes time, so I often get questions about, well, how often do you have to take readings when you're doing a test? So if you're testing in a soil that is a moderately permeable soil or relatively fast soil, you may have to stay fairly close by and take a reading every minute, every 5 minutes, if the water is flowing out of the permeameter relatively quickly. But if it's most sandy loam type soils or finer grained are going to be relatively, the permeability is going to be a little slower. And so what a lot of practitioners do is they set up, they'll get their permeameter test started and then do their test pit profile, or they may get their test pit dug, kind of do a quick check of the soil horizons and see, where they might like to do a permeability test to get some additional information on a particular horizon to see what kind of a K value they get for that soil. And then auger down, or combination of get the backhoe to dig down and then auger to the final testing depth, get their permeameter test set up. And then they could go back to logging their test pit profile. So they might just let the test run for the first 15, 20 minutes, half hour, whatever. And as long as the permeameter hasn't run out of water, they can then start recording, taking readings every 5 minutes. And as long as they take enough readings to determine that, yes, the rate of fall has leveled out, then they know they've run the test long enough. The math is obviously easier if you take readings at the same increments. So if you take a reading every minute or every 5 minutes, then it's a little quicker to determine if the rate of fall, how much it's dropping per minute in centimeters per minute, is the same. If you're taking them, if you get tied up talking to a client on the site, or you spend more time in the test pit than you thought, or you're having to give the backhoe directions of where to go to dig the next hole, and you may not be taking your readings at a even spacing, it's not a problem. It just means that you're just going to have to do that quick calculation of the distance it's dropped, the water level has dropped over what time period since you last took a reading, and calculate that convert that into rate of fall, so that you can see, is the rate of fall the same? Is it now leveled out and we've reached steady state or not? So I just wanted to point that out, because you don't have to take readings at very regular intervals, but it's often helpful if you can. Anyway, I think that is basically all I had, unless I'm not sure how. We have some other people presenting here. I think questions probably are going to hold those till the end, Dendra, if there's any questions.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Do put your questions into the chat window. We're going to hand off now to Lawrence Gill and Joanne if she wants to share her video or audio, and then we will get to the questions at the end. But be assured, if you have to leave the meeting, the training before the end of this meeting, if it's in the chat window, somebody will get back to you, and we will take care of that.